Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Ian Terry with IS Partners. We are going to get started here on an awesome webinar talking about artificial intelligence and the newly released NIST AI 100-1 AI Risk Management Framework special publication. Before we get into the subject matter, just want to do a quick company background about IS Partners. We are a CPA firm specializing in SOC, high trust, NIST, PCI, ISO 27001, and soon to be a CMMC certified third-party assessor organization. We provide a streamlined audit solution model that is enhanced by the use of a SaaS tool. And our full-time consultants have hand-on experience in the IT field as CISOs, network administrators, project managers, and we also provide penetration testing and vulnerability assessment services. To introduce myself to get things started, my name is Ian Terry. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity Services. I've got nearly a decade of experience performing information and technology services from a consultancy and advisory standpoint, as well as an internal resource. I perform a number of risk assessments and other audit activities related to many of the frameworks that I mentioned before, including certainly NIST 853 and 80171, ISO, HIPAA, high trust, FISMA, PCI, and even CMS acceptable risk safeguards. Some of my cybersecurity publications exist in Hacker Noon, Security Boulevard, and CISO Mag. I'd like to pass things off and introduce to you the co-presenter for today, Jena Andrews.
Jena Andrews here. I am a senior consultant at IS Partners. I have a little bit of a different background, I would say, than Ian. I started initially in more of the general project management space, and about 5 years or so ago branched into audit and compliance. So I started more so doing SOC 1, SOC 2 auditing, and then branched into more intricate cybersecurity assessments, including PCI DSS, ISO 27001, NIST 853, 800, 171. I also hold several certifications related to audit, project management, and also CMMC. Today, we want to have a discussion around the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. That is the bread and butter, I guess, of this conversation. But before we get into that, there's some high-level things that we'll kind of touch on before we get into the framework itself. So we figured it'd be a good way to start the conversation off by just talking about what artificial intelligence is. I think there's certainly some misconceptions or misuse of the word or the phrase itself. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. We'll talk about how artificial intelligence is used in today's business world. So we'll have some examples there. And then primarily we'll jump into challenges faced today using AI. So this is what kind of prompts our introduction and understanding of the NIST AI Risk Management Framework. And then we'll kind of end it with a practical example of how we can apply some of the stuff that we talk about into today's world or into an organization that you may be with today. To start off the conversation, let's kind of at a high level talk artificial intelligence. So the NIST AI Risk Management Framework, the AI Risk Management Framework publication, refers to AI as an engineered or machine-based system that can, for any given set of objectives, generate outputs such as predictions, recommendations, or decisions, influencing real or virtual environments. So this is coming straight from the publication and is really a boring, maybe, way to define this topic. I think, Ian, you might even have a better description or maybe a more baseline way of
Yeah.
understanding what artificial intelligence is.
Well, it's interesting. I actually thought it would be fair to give AI an opportunity to define itself. So, what I did is I asked ChatGPT to provide a layman definition of AI, and it gave, I would say, a pretty good response. I'll read it. At its core, AI or artificial intelligence is a branch of computer science that aims to create machines like computers or bots that can perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. It gives some examples like understanding spoken language, recognizing patterns, making decisions, or playing games. Generally, imagine a computer that can learn from its mistakes, adapt to new information, and even make predictions about the future based on data. That's AI in action. And to aid in our understanding of the different kind of boxes or categories of artificial intelligence as we interact with it today in the business world, I've got a very great kind of a Venn diagram by Jeff Winter, one of the leading frontline speakers on the topic of AI. So we've got obviously the large circle there, artificial intelligence, to the way Jena described it, right? It's a field of science that encompasses all of these different types of applications, practical manifestations of AI. Really the primary one that we interact with today are those systems that are based on machine learning. And you can see that there's a bunch of different kind of subcategories of that. And right there at the bottom in the middle, you can barely make it out, ChatGPT sitting there within the transformer-based language model. And that's going to be your most prevalent application of the use of AI today. Now, certainly for the purpose of our conversation, a lot of these other types of AIs and these other mechanisms by which we utilize it are still applicable or apropos to the conversation once we get into the risk management framework itself. But again, just a really great illustration of where ChatGPT as an example and other front center examples exist within that field of AI as computer science. And to further the approach for illustrating the concept, one of the major appeals and values within AI to the individual and to industries and business is for its ability to identify patterns and derive relationships, right? It can be given a set of unorganized data and identify attributes or characteristics of that data and kind of organize it or create relationships between that data. In many instances, relationships within data that rely on attributes that are so discrete that they are not obvious or even recognizable feasibly by humans, and we need to rely on AI to recognize those differences. So, very, very basic illustration here. We've got the unorganized data set on the left, right? We can see that there are attributes shared among them, but they are disorganized, right? We've got common shapes, colors, and even semantically some different words that would relate to each other. We insert the magic AI arrow there in the middle, and AI has kind of organized those things for us, right? Not only by shape and color, but semantically as well. We've got happy, laugh, smile, all human expressions that it was able to recognize, right? And this kind of characterizes or illustrates really where AI has an edge beyond that of a human being in organizing this data, recognizing relationships, and providing us with insights that we would really never be able to recognize ourselves, especially in the business environment now where there's so much data, right? This is not just 9 shapes, right? This is 9 million like sales events or events that occur within like a program, or millions and millions of words worth of text or publications, articles, novels, etc., that are being analyzed and ingested by this AI systems. And now in AI in the business world, practically, there are a number of different tools and technologies that are relevant to our day to day. We've got the first obvious one, ChatGPT. Again, a large language model. We use it to write emails and things like that. I mean, I don't do that, but I mean, wink, wink, wink. I don't use ChatGPT so much, but
Calling you out on that.
Yeah, exactly. But a couple other cool examples here. Midjourney, which is one of the industry leaders, I would say, for AI image generation based on prompts. Grammarly, which has been kind of ubiquitous for writing assistance, grammar, punctuation, sentence structure. They've introduced an artificial intelligence component to improve the quality of their service. And then finally, an example, maybe a little less front and center or recognizable, would be the TensorFlow, which is a machine learning model that can really be applied to virtually any context if you wanted to take advantage of AI and machine learning, again, to recognize relationships and attributes within data sets and organize them into analytics or reports or insights that would empower your business. So really, all these are great examples of tools that are being adopted by companies today and are, likely going to become critical as part of their business operations. And as such, we need to kind of consider the challenges and risks associated with the use of these tools, notwithstanding the actual development of these tools. And with that, I'll kick things over to Jena to kind of help identify some of those challenges.
Yeah, so we talked about what AI is at a very basic high level and some of the use cases and ways that businesses are implementing the use of AI today. But there's also with that some challenges, risks, and ethical concerns that we can talk about. And I think that is widely discussed in today, in business world today, right? People are sometimes apprehensive to bring AI into their workplace because of some of these things. So I'll, at a high level, address some of these. And maybe one of the most talked about, I would say, is malfunction. So, and this being a huge risk, right? And a example might be thinking about autonomous vehicles. So obviously, these vehicles have AI-powered systems where it's being used to detect environmental obstructions or signs and things like that. So, God forbid there is a malfunction with the AI system being used that could create serious harm, damage, certainly reputation issues, or just when it comes to artificial intelligence or people wanting to utilize these sort of functionalities in that sort of way. Another one might be bias and fairness when we talk about risk and challenge. So another good example, I think in today's world, I see this quite often, at least when we do a lot of HR, human resources, onboarding, hiring. A lot of organizations may use AI systems to initially review resumes. So they might have a posting and take in resumes and then have particular solutions review resumes at a high level and kind of filter things out that way. And while this may be helpful to organizations, surely time saving, there might be some bias and fairness kind of issues here if we think about how the AI solution or system is configured to sift through resumes, right? So if they're using historical data for this particular process, and maybe there is a certain demographic or somebody who typically holds a particular position or role for this particular organization in previous and over time, the solution might pick up on that and might kind of inadvertently rule out some quality candidates. So something to think about there. There's certainly other risks, challenges, ethical concerns, dependence being one. We obviously don't want to over rely on AI. Like, as Ian mentioned, he writes all of his documents using ChatGPT. We don't recommend that. I'm just kidding. But certainly it's important to have that human aspect on things that we do to this day. And over dependence is certainly a challenge that we could potentially face. Transparency, privacy, consent, these are all kind of ethical concerns. So AI, I think a lot of people still are unknowing of the functionality a lot of these AI solutions and systems, and the vast amount of data that is being used. So there's certainly concerns around privacy, consent, and finally security of these systems. Right? Obviously, we have, again, so many different data points coming into these systems. Is the AI solution, is the AI system configured in a way and managed, monitored in a way to avoid cybersecurity attacks? Essentially, the goal is that we try to implement and incorporate AI in a safe and secure manner. So, with that said, all of these challenges, ethical concerns, risks, NIST has kind of taken into consideration and in earlier this year adopted a new released a new publication, which is the AI Risk Management Framework 1.0. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this was published in January of last year. I think I misspoke earlier. It was January of last year. So still relatively new publication. So we'll dive into the publication. We call it the core, or some of the sections within the publication. But before we get into that, we'll just talk about NIST a little bit and what the publication was designed to do, essentially. So NIST is a federal agency that operates under the U.S. Department of Commerce. So NIST is very well known for introducing cybersecurity standards or publications to improve cybersecurity posture for federal and non-federal systems or organizations. So some of the more common publications that many of you may have heard of is NIST 853, 800-171, being kind of the main two, I would say. 853 is a standard or publication designed for federal systems, while 800-171 is designed for non-federal systems. And is actually the basis for CMMC, which is a new regulation or certification that subcontractors of the Department of Defense are contractually obligated to essentially certify against, which 800-171 is the basis for this. So moving into the AI risk management framework, this publication, to my understanding, or to our understanding, is not really contractually obligated anywhere in our industry that we're seeing. It's more or less designed to be voluntarily used with organizations. And I think really a really great tool or standard to be proactive when it comes to AI. So we'll get into more about what organizations may want to consider adopting this framework, or at least, understanding some of the elements of the publication itself. But really, it's more use case, and I think something voluntary but I think as we continue to kind of delve into artificial intelligence in the business world, I think it may start becoming more of a widespread.
Yeah. And I almost want to just interject and say, like, yes, this is not a requirement asterisk yet, right? And certainly, in the case of, I would say, almost all of these special publications and standards and this and that, as it relates to cybersecurity, when they're first introduced, right, they're not a requirement. Now, going back to some of those risks and challenges and ethics, right, if there is a rampant situation where EVs equipped with self-driving mechanisms are running into people on the street, or something horrible is happening there, and more of these challenges come up in the wake of ubiquitous adoption of AI systems, I would say it's a pretty high likelihood that there's going to be a response to that in the form of regulation, of policy making, and certainly a part of that transformation into AI standards is likely going to at least start with imposing these types of standards on into federal entities, right? And to your point, Jenna, earlier, to contractors and subcontractors that work with federal entities, right? The question they're going to be asking is, oh, if you are providing a service to us at the federal or even the state government level, how much of that service is built on artificial intelligence, and how are you controlling those risks and those challenges in ethics? So, again, this RMF as it exists today is kind of like the standard of best practice that I would anticipate in the future is going to become the actual mandatory standard, certainly for the public sector, and likely to expand into the private sector as well, just like we saw for 853, 800-171, and even really the non-required different frameworks and certifications, things like SOC audits or ISO 27001, right? There's certainly going to be an extension into that as it relates to AI. And I would say AI RMF, if that isn't the standard itself, it's going to be a critical part of it.
Yeah, I would agree.
Cool. So let's dig into, I guess, the actual AI risk management framework itself.
Yeah, so again, in the publication, they kind of take what I would consider a standard risk management framework, not necessarily considering AI, and then bring the AI elements into it. And what I mean by that is the publication talks about challenges or considerations around risk measurement, risk tolerance, risk prioritization, overall management of risk, right? So these are all considerations that need to be made in any risk management framework.
Mm-hmm.
Now in this publication, obviously there's considerations specifically for AI. So because there are risks that are seemingly unknown with the implementation, deployment of AI, it's hard to measure risk that is unknown, right? That's impossible. It's also hard to understand your tolerance for risk if you're really not measuring risk, at least unknown risks. And then how can you prioritize risks when you really can't measure them or identify them? So the publication goes into a little bit more just about trying to better understand how to identify these sort of risks, challenges, ethical concerns, some of which we just talked about, and really just making sure that organizations take the management of AI risk, certainly making sure it's an important element if they're going to adopt this standard, and treating these risks as really critical risks that can affect your organization's cybersecurity posture.
Yeah, indeed. And I just want to call out that figure one there. That's actually from the AI RMF itself. And you can see how quite plainly it connects back to a lot of those challenges and those ethics and those concerns that we had talked about a little earlier, right? And they kind of group those into three major buckets: harm to people, harm to organization, harm to ecosystem. And I think it's quite salient to consider how much consideration, attention, and attention is applied to the impact on the individual and groups of people in the context of AI compared to something like just like general cybersecurity, right? Very rarely are we thinking, except for some examples that come up, kind of commonly when we're talking about like healthcare, right? The healthcare, the hospital got a ransomware attack, right? There's a material risk to individuals' lives, right? I think AI is also kind of unique in that way. In that harm to people part is very front and center, and in a lot of ways maybe even more complex than just physical and bodily harm. We're getting into this. The civil liberties and rights of individuals are potentially going to be impacted by the adoption and utilization of these AI systems, should those AI systems not be handled and created with any respect to managing that harm to people. So I think that's an interesting idiosyncrasy about AI and managing AI risk.
Yeah, I mean the risk management framework I think takes all of those things and considerations into account and talks about how to identify what they consider a trustworthy AI system, right? So you're going to
Yeah.
talk about that.
Yeah, that's right. So kind of in response, let's we've got all these risks, these harms, these ethical considerations, right? NIST said, okay, what type of AI would handle all those? What is an AI system that would address all of those concerns, at least to the most that's feasibly able to be produced and implemented? And they came up with this concept of a trustworthy AI system. And you see they break it down into these little pieces, these little components that I'll talk through very on a high level, really. But you can see they clearly map back to those three buckets: harm to ecosystem, harm to people, harm to organizations. They go back to those ethical and those ethical challenges and concerns and security issues that have to do with AI, right? They're saying, okay, in response to that, companies need to develop or utilize AI systems that are considered trustworthy, that are created and managed with consideration to these attributes, right? Safe. Okay, that goes directly back to that harm to people. We gave the example earlier of the EV sector utilizing a lot of autonomous driving functionality, right? Safe. You want to have an AI system that's driving your car. You want it to be trustworthy insofar it is safe to use. Secure and resilient, right? Availability of the AI system, integrity of the AI system, resilience against cybersecurity attacks of the AI system, right? We want to develop it so that it is secure and resilient. This one's super interesting: explainable and interpretable. Going back to Jena's list earlier, one of them was transparency. It was an issue of and me as a I'm a cybersecurity professional and researcher, not so much of an AI professional. So a lot of these tools that I'm using, like ChatGPT, I don't really know how they work, right? At the very on the very deep level. And that could probably be said for, a lot of the different AI systems that we're using or in production. At a certain point, if we're creating these systems that we don't even really know how to use, we can't interpret or even explain how they function, how can we understand where the failure exists should those systems do something unexpected or break, right? And so a component of that trustworthy AI system is that it's actually explainable and interpretable insofar as how it actually functions. Privacy enhanced. Going back to consideration of the civil liberties of people, right? We have a right to privacy. It's called the Privacy Act. And AI ingesting all of this data, consider in the future we may be leveraging AI to do population health, where we're looking at really, if not medical records, at least the genetic information and data collected by companies like 23andMe, for example, to try to identify discrete relationships between phenotypes and alleles and other genetic materials that the humans just aren't able to perceive, at least not presently, right? With those AI systems, that's a great example where the privacy of the individual is at risk when we're utilizing that type of medical data, that sensitive data, when it's commingled and pooled in these gigantic data lakes and leveraging AI, right? So ensuring that AI system is enhanced in such a way as to mitigate the risk to that data, to the individual's privacy as it relates to their genetic makeup or their health information. That's a critical component of a trustworthy AI system, and I think a really good practical example of where that challenge or that risk is presented to us today.
Ian, what are your thoughts around AI doctors?
AI doctors, I certainly hope that they're privacy enhanced, and I definitely hope that they're safe as well.
That's a good point.
I think that of all the AI systems, the AI doctor, it sounds cool. I'm into it, but I just hope that it is developed in a trustworthy way, is what I'll say on that point.
All right. All right.
And to go into the next one, fair with harmful bias managed, right? Also super important. Again, going back to the civil liberties, harm to people, and even I would say harm to the integrity or reliability of the output just generally, right? A lot of people think bias, they instantly think, bias of the individual against the individual, right? Things like gender or race or orientation, demographic, right? All those things that we tend to associate with bias. But in fact, there are biases that exist within the data that are not necessarily based on those things. It's more so just a restriction or a shortcoming of the human mind and the way that humans function, and that we're actually potentially generating data with bias that's inherent to it. And as a result, the output of the system itself, the AI system, is kind of, the well is tainted automatically, but just because the data that we've generated is not without bias. It's impossible for that data to be generated without bias. So, and I think that's why they say with harmful bias managed, not altogether eliminated, because it's actually impossible to eliminate bias. I think it's interesting. And the last two here, valid and reliable, and you can see that's a big rectangle. So you can, they're essentially saying, okay, a trustworthy AI system is going to be valid and reliable throughout, right? Safe. That's not going to go anywhere. The safety mechanism is not going to fail. Privacy enhanced, fair, right? These things are going to be valid and reliable throughout all of these different attributes and these applications of AI. And then finally at the end, accountable and transparent, right? Again, we're able to look at the output of an AI and kind of follow the breadcrumbs of logic, right? Or even programmatically follow the breadcrumbs. Why did the AI make this decision? What element of the system, what piece of data informed it that resulted in this output, right? That's that accountability, almost like an audit trail of logic that we can explore, equipping your AI system with that, or at least ensuring that if you're going to use an AI system, that it supports, not only that, but all of these trustworthy characteristics, I think are, is going to be critical and something that really businesses need to consider. Again, not only developing these AI systems, but actually adopting them and using them as well. Now, that was kind of part one of the AI RMF, talking about the risks, talking about the AI, the trustworthy AI system. Now, the second part of the AI RMF is kind of the program that tries to respond to address AI risk. And they break it up into four core components, four specific functions: govern, map, measure, and manage, which we'll kind of break into. We'll get into just on a high level here. I'll start off with the first one, govern. Certainly, if you're in the IT audit or the GRC, even the cybersecurity space, you know that this governance element is going to be there in all of those fields, right? And all of those applications of those concepts, right? And usually that comes in the form of things like written policy, right? Policy, processes, procedures, right? Some kind of documentation that compels an organization to take a certain step or conform to a certain requirement. Accountability also describes roles and responsibilities. Who's responsible for this part of the AI? Who do we turn to make sure that that we're complying with our contractual, or in the future, to my earlier point, regulatory obligations associated with AI? Right, governance, again, just like it exists in that governance, risk, and compliance field or conceptual space, that is a critical part of the AI RMF itself, right? It's kind of one of the primary functions. You can see it's right there in the middle of that little primary function atomic structure thing going on there.
I would say, sorry, not to interrupt you.
Yeah.
As far as like a practical, tangible item for the governed function, if you're thinking about this standard and implementing the standard, like you mentioned, policy and procedure, but also like a RACI chart. We see these a lot for numerous things, but certainly the AI risk management framework is a lot of the controls or requirements that are published in the standard are all around accountability and defining roles and responsibilities to ensure people understand that the systems are transparent, that people are grasping and understanding how these systems work. So a RACI chart might be a good example of something that you'd probably end up having to, if not already documented, document specific to sort of AI related processes.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. No, a really good example. The second primary function here is map. It's essentially saying, okay, all of the where we're using AI within our company, where we're allowed to use ChatGPT, what business processes, what systems rely on that AI system. We need to map that. We need to recognize the relationship between AI and what we're doing from a business perspective. And that's this really the second function in a nutshell. And maybe that's just mapping, hey, we're using ChatGPT for this or that, but it may also include mapping of service providers or supply chain. You can almost think of it as mapping, who are we reliant on either for providing AI as a service to us or actually developing or maintaining our AI systems, right? There's a degree of risk that they present. So mapping really means understanding your ecosystem as it relates to your business processes, your supply chain, and the AI systems that are utilized by either of those components.
I'd also say with mapping, a lot of time within the publication itself, it brings up mapping the use, deployment, design of AI systems to internal control responsibilities and any legal or contractual requirements. So making sure the organization understands, okay, here's where we have AI implemented, or here's where we're deploying it, all of this stuff. Legally, contractually, and compliance for all of these other things that we need to be compliant for. We need to map this stuff out and make sure, because things may come up at that point. You may be doing something that's out of compliance for XYZ. So I think that's also part of the mapping function, as well as doing cost benefit analysis. I think that's another kind of deliverable item, the publication or the standard. If I'm sure this is being done internally, but kind of documenting specific to the use case of AI, cost benefit. So, okay, if we are mapping all of this stuff out and we're contractually and legally abiding by what we need to, let's look at cost benefit, right? Does it even make sense based on what we're paying versus other options? Mm-hmm. So that would all kind of be handled within this function as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome.
The third function here is measure. So the measure function, this is where organizations kind of are starting to think about the quantitative, qualitative methodologies that are used to analyze and monitor AI risk and impact. So it's really getting down to like the intricacies of how AI risks are being identified, how these system solutions are being monitored, tracking these metrics and making sure that those trustworthy AI characteristics that Ian talked about, making sure that these things, again, are being understood and implemented. And then, of course, assessing the efficiency of how these things are being measured. So this is where things get really probably more detailed than maybe even I myself can go into. But this is where the understanding of how AI systems, whether they're in use or being designed and deployed or implemented, whatever the case may be, this is where the publication or the standard has guidelines to really understand the intricacy of these things. The fourth function is the manage function. So I like to say similarly to govern, because again, there's really a governance element to all of these things, but kind of going back to risk management in a more general conversation. Ultimately, the manage function is making sure that organizations are identifying AI risk. They are prioritizing these risks based on impact likelihood. Again, these are all kind of standard practices that any risk management program would have in place, but certainly with consideration for AI risks. It also touches on making sure resources are being allocated appropriately, and making sure any sort of post-implementation, post-deployment of AI systems are consistently being monitored. So ConMon maybe is a good term for this, but continuous monitoring of AI risk is really what the manage function is primarily hitting on.
Awesome. Conmon. That's some
ConMon.
NIST adjacent language for you. Very good.
Like that.
All right, very cool. So just about wrapped up here. What we did want to do is kind of help to visualize practically what the adoption of the AI RMF would look like. So you can see here we came up with a hypothetical company, though maybe not in the future, Jena Corp, who is using ChatGPT to write front-end code for their web application. They've actually adopted the AI RMF. I think it's a pretty salient example where we definitely know that there are programmers out there. You don't have to raise your hand or anything that are using ChatGPT to write code, and this company is all about it. But the difference between Jena Corp and your company is that they are controlling the risk associated with that activity by utilizing the AI RMF. How are they doing that? We've got the 4 functions there at the bottom. We'll start with govern. Going back to that policy procedure, Jena Corp has created policies that dictate organizational commitment to understanding and managing AI risk. And go figure, they also came up with a RACI chart, a responsibility assignment matrix that clearly defines accountability roles and personnel that are established with managing the different risks and really the different types of activities and business processes that are used by Jena Corp and use AI to actually do that. And they've also involved their legal counsel to review and take into consideration different jurisdictional elements where legislature, laws, regulations, even contracts with private entities is reviewed with consideration to AI, right? Is there anything in there that either restricts our ability to use ChatGPT for writing front-end code, or are there any responsibilities or requirements if we're going to use that, right? So we've taken that approach for govern. We've mapped the limitations on the use of ChatGPT. We've mapped those specifically to those business processes, right? We understand, okay, ChatGPT at Jena Corp strictly used for front-end coding. And we're going to communicate that relationship via certainly some of the policy and the documentation we provided, but also generally through awareness, making sure that those who are at the company, really everybody, not just the developers, for example, understand that that is the relationship between the use of ChatGPT and our business process, is that we use it for front-end code. Anything else not allowed. We've also developed code review standards for ChatGPT developed code. So ensuring that there's some type of oversight, there's some kind of QA or review conducted by a engineer to make sure that the code developed by ChatGPT isn't just spaghetti code nonsense, that it actually makes sense, which ChatGPT is pretty good, but not without its flaws or faults. And of course, just generally making sure that there's awareness that there's risks actually not just associated with ChatGPT, the application itself, but with OpenAI, which is the company that produces the ChatGPT application or AI language model. It's important to consider that not only the use of the application, but the relationship between Jena Corp and that company introduces business risk. And we want to understand and map those so we know what our risk environment looks like. Measure. We want to identify any specific risks that we've identified in the context of a risk assessment, an AI risk assessment. We've documented those within a risk register. Maybe even you could consider it, for those in the audience that are more familiar with NIST 853, it might be in our POAM, our plan of action milestones, right? We've got some findings and things we want to improve upon as it relates to managing our ChatGPT risks. And then, measuring going back to that concept of supply chain and open AI, we're ensuring that we're reviewing their security documentation and their certifications. And wouldn't you know it, they themselves have a SOC 2 report that they make available. And then finally, we're managing all of those risks really with controls, right? Either technical controls, administrative controls, physical controls, maybe. I'm not really sure, but but definitely the first two. And we're also getting ahead of any potential AI related situations or incidents by doing incident response planning that accounts for an AI related risk. I have an example of an activity that a company could do. I don't know, Jena, if you know what I'm thinking of, to test their incident response capability.
Tabletop testing. Come on now.
Yeah, tabletop exercise. If you are using AI, it might be worth for your next tabletop exercise to say, hey, injection, ChatGPT is doing something bad. That's the best I can do off the top of now.
On the spot.
Yeah. But a really good example, right? Considering AI, your dependency on that in an incident response planning exercise. And then, moving forward in the future, Corp continuing ongoing assessment, Kanban, to use that awesome term that Jena used, control monitoring, ongoing, right? This is ChatGPT is improving. We're using new systems, Copilot now. We've got Bard, right? There's a million different applications. Certainly going to be more in the future. This is a process that's ongoing. Risk management is not a one and done, that we took care of 3 years ago. This is something that needs to be continuously addressed and managed in the future. And we're going to change and improve our program to reflect changes in the legal, business, and technology environment. So that covers all of the four functions of the AI RMF and how, this hypothetical company, maybe if you're listening, you're recognizing, hey, we're using ChatGPT to write back-end code and we're not doing any of these things, right? What do we do? Well, that's a really good question, and I have an answer. So, just generally, any company that's listening right now, or maybe not listening, just generally should consider implementing the AI risk management framework, specifically those that design, develop, deploy, and use these products. So that's going to be everybody, by the way, soon enough. And what should they do next? I think that really, and this applies to any framework or compliance standard, et cetera, you want to do an initial AI risk assessment, right? You want to assess, where does our company currently stand as it relates to this standard? What are we doing for measure, manage? Are we doing nothing? Are we doing some things? We need to understand those things. We need to do an assessment with IS partners, where we're going to help you identify those gaps and those challenges. We're going to provide you with insights and advisory assistance on how to develop your AI risk management program. And a really good example of a starting point you can get ahead of this assessment, something that I generally advise companies create and adopt, is an AI acceptable use policy. It's probably the lowest hanging fruit. Hey, company, we know you're all using ChatGPT. We just need you to understand that if you're going to do that, these are the boundaries, these are the parameters, these are the rules and restrictions as they relate to using it for business purposes at our company. Acceptable use policy. And that's, of course, something that we at IS Partners would be happy to help you produce, create, and disseminate as well, of course. If you enjoyed listening to this discussion, if you got any follow-up questions, you are welcome to reach out to myself, Jena, or even one of our business development representatives, Porter. As an example, we've also got our website, phone number, and address available if you would like to send us a letter. We would love to get that. That would be pretty cool and funny. But in short, reach out to us however you want to. We're happy to help get on a conversation, get on a call to talk about what we can do to manage your AI risk. And with that, we will close out. Jena, thanks so much for being on. And everyone, have a great day.